And actually, just to add into that, what they need to do isn't the optional stuff. What they need to do is actually the required stuff. Their boiler blew up, the heating and cooling units are failing, they need some basic structural changes in here, so it's a very important thing to support. And this part of the facility, of course, is in marvelous condition, because it's brand new. I'd like to throw something out here, too, which is, as far as we do lots of theaters, being theater consultants, one might imagine, and one of the things that's a big variable job, the job is the client and the end user, which are not necessarily the same thing in most projects. And on this job, one of the unusual aspects is we actually had a client who had a vision of what the room they wanted was, and that is no mean feat, let me tell you. So you should be congratulated for that, Jerry. Jerry and Simi were pretty clear what they wanted to feel like and how far they were willing to push. And the net result is a space that is very unique in Raleigh and in actually North Carolina because of its adaptive use, its flexibility, and Burning Coal's willingness to use the space in creative ways. I found that when people come to shows here, they walk away absolutely thrilled because of the level of immersion in the show, and this room is a lot of what makes that possible. And then the willingness of the directors, of the artistic staff to actually dive in and do that makes a huge difference, and it's something that's a unique experience for people in town, I think.
As I sat, really having come to the theater, seeing it fully formed, having not been in it for at least a couple months prior, and we sat through the first show that evening, and then sat following as local musicians played for us. I was overcome in a positive sense by a remarkable sense of calm. And as I looked around me, the various things I saw that contributed to that, not the least of which was seeing the electrical conduit. But there was also exhaustion too. But there was also the fact that they and you had retained the original stage background, and there's a fancy proscenium.
Yeah. That was
and I think there's a story that goes with that.
That was Greg's idea originally. Greg, you want to tell that too?
Well, the way the building was originally laid out, there was a small lobby exactly where we are here, only about 10 feet deep, and then the floor sloped down, and there was a stage with a large wooden arch surrounding it, and that was sort of the main focus originally. And the new plan was to put the dressing rooms and the mechanical space on what used to be the stage, and drop the floor down and make the black box theater in what used to be the seating area. So as a sort of gesture to the past, we actually had to take the arch down to do the work, and then we reassembled it in its original location, just so that we could have that connection to the past. And it's painted to match the wall so that it sort of disappears as doesn't become an element in the room that jumps out at you. It's sort of there for you to discover.
It's subtle, but it's hard for those of us who've worked here now for several months to imagine that wall, which is the central focus of the room, without that subtlety. And right now, I wanted to mention that Simi and I, when we were originally thinking about, to follow up on Curtis's comment, there were three spaces, far larger and originally more expensive to build, but that they all had elements to them that we were interested in. One was the Trinity Repertory Company's upstairs space in Providence, Rhode Island. The second was Peter Brook's theater in Paris, the Bouffe du Nord. And the third space was in London, the Donmar Warehouse. And each of those spaces have managed, to one degree or another, to combine intimacy, the original architecture architecture and texture of the building into the playing space. And also, lastly, I think a sense of intimacy, as most of those other spaces are much larger than ours, and so there's not a lot there, but the ideas were there in the formulation of it, and that idea was able to be conveyed, I think, to the team, and the team got it, and we were very lucky to have a group of people working with us, and I include Greg Warren with that too, Peter. You know, your executive director got that to a degree, and then their own ideas began to contribute to that. And one example is the bar to our left over here. Greg's original idea, or Lewis's original idea for that, was somewhat different than what we ultimately ended up with. But Greg, in the demolition of the space, discovered some old doors that were quite beautiful and still relatively sound, and it came upon the idea at that point to incorporate them into the design. And that is obviously such a focal point when one enters the space right now, that again, it's sort of hard to imagine the space without it at this point. The other thing that happened architecturally that's interesting is, to me, this came from Lewis, was the idea of mixing the very new, and Lewis, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but the very new and abstract with the old textures that were originally in the building 100 years ago.
Well, the thought was to try to create as much drama, really, as possible using what's here, and sort of taking the characteristics that are here. And in design, one of the things you look for is to highlight something through contrast. And so if everything was homogeneously old and kind of one character, it's actually less expressive of that quality than if it's set off with a contrast. And so the idea of these, this very sleek kind of light wall there as a counterpoint to this very dark textural wall, they, I think, create a broader range of experience by setting those two kind of extremes. So that's kind of the design concept behind it.
There's some people in Cary who need to hear that.
Yes, very much so.
I wanted to ask if there's anything else you guys would like to say about the project, any little detail that you think might historically.
I have one that's actually kind of fun that people we've dealt with for so long we forget about, which is that there are two people who are living above where the stage was. And there are two apartments up there, and that apartment location actually became one of the limiting factors in terms of how the interior got shaped and the lobby got shaped, because we were basically sandwiched between this brick wall and that apartment, because that was the end of the height. The apartment dips down into the theater volume. Having an apartment above a stage is a no-no in terms of fire and everything else. And that is, I think, one of the more unique things about this building, is that we had to work around that. And that was the early limitation. We all think, oh yeah, we worked around the apartment, that's no deal. But in truth, that was no mean feat.
Absolutely. when we were totally demolished between our space and that space, I could see the backside of the drywall in the apartment. I could hear the lady in the apartment as if she was in this room. So I knew that what we built on this side of that drywall, it was going to be pretty important to our future relationship.
Glad you said the backside of the drywall.
Well, another thing that we had to do was right in the doorway between the balcony area and the back mechanical space is literally the drain from one of the toilets in there, and that actually had to be relocated, so we had to cut the water off for a little while and get things sort of snaked a little bit out of the way. So there's the other backside. We could
dimmer room too, isn't
Right.
it? Yeah.
Never cut her phone.